Now, to be honest with you, in saying all this, I'm not against self-pronouncing text. I just think it's a funny phrase to call these symbols that we put on words that in reality are not self-pronouncing. You actually have to figure out what do these symbols mean, and even if you do figure it out, the pronunciation that they give may not match the pronunciation that most people actually use. So in that sense, it's kind of a scam. I mean, why do we call it self-pronouncing text? So a lot of King James Bibles have something called self-pronouncing text, and it is advertised like it is this wonderful thing. I mean, just the name of it sounds great. Self-pronouncing text. That's awesome. That means that the text will pronounce itself. If you have a word that's hard to pronounce, it's just going to pronounce itself according to that title, self-pronouncing text. I want to examine that in this video and look at, is this even a useful thing? Do people actually use self-pronouncing text? And even more interesting to me is self-pronouncing text even correct? When you read the pronunciations, do they match the way that we should pronounce these names and places? And really, I think what you're going to see is that self-pronouncing text is not really, in my opinion, all that useful, and you could even say it's kind of wrong in a certain way. It's kind of a scam. Now, this is really just in jest. This is not meant to be super serious, but it is interesting when you look at something like this, just to kind of see, is it something that's really useful? Because it's advertised as something that's really great. And I do want to get feedback on this. I'd love to hear in the comments if there are people out there who use self-pronouncing text, if it's useful to you, and also, are some of the things that I'm showing in this video pronounced differently than how you pronounce these names and places? So I'd love to see that in the comment section. But I have a few different things I want to show you, a few different names, places that I want to show you in the King James Bible. And I'm going to ask the question, how do you pronounce this? And then we're going to look at the self-pronouncing text to see what it says. So the first one that I'm going to show here is a name. This is actually a name that we named our daughter. And I will say this is a name that people do pronounce in different ways. And we pronounce it Naomi. This is how we say her name. And when she goes places, she prefers to be called Naomi, but there are other people who will call her Naomi. And perhaps you're out there saying, yeah, when I see that name, that's how I say it, Naomi. Well, maybe the self-pronouncing text can clear this up for us. What does it say about the name Naomi or Naomi? So when we look at it here in the book of Ruth, there is the name, and it says Naomi. Naomi. The accent there is on the first syllable, and it is a long A, and then it has a long O, and then I checked the pronunciation chart, and that I at the end there, according to the self-pronouncing text, is supposed to be pronounced I. So according to the self-pronouncing text, the way that you say this name is Naomi. Now, that's interesting because, first of all, no one I know says it that way, and I'm pretty sure that if you check this in Hebrew, it's not pronounced that way in Hebrew either. So I have no idea why in the world the self-pronouncing text says that the word or the name Naomi is supposed to be Naomi. Maybe I'm wrong on this, and can anybody out there shed some light on this? Do any of you actually say the name Naomi this way as Naomi? So that to me is an instance where the self-pronouncing text is actually steering people in the wrong direction. I will say there's a lot of names in here that match the way that we say things, and maybe it is helpful to some people. I have a feeling, though, that a lot of people don't even know what these symbols mean, so it's probably even more confusing to them than just reading the names and places to begin with. But maybe it is helpful to some people. Anyway, let's check another name. Now, a lot of us like the stories in the book of Daniel, and as many people know, he had 3 Hebrew friends that stood up with him and did what was right in Babylon, and their names were Well, we often say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's their names, right? Well, let's look it up in the self-pronouncing text here. And it says, Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So according to this, we've been actually saying that name Shadrach wrong. At least that's how I've always said it. That's how I've always heard it. How do you say his name? According to the self-pronouncing text, it's not Shadrach, it's Shadrach. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So I think this shows you that I think self-pronouncing text probably has influenced our pronunciations to some degree, but in other ways they haven't really stood the test of time, and people pronounce names differently than what you see in the self-pronouncing text. Now again, a lot of the self-pronouncing text does match how we might say the names and places, but I just wonder how useful is this actually, and in cases we see here where if someone doesn't know how to say this, and they read the self-pronouncing text, they may end up saying the name in a way that nobody else says that name. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Does anybody say Shadrach? I'd like to see that in the comments if that's how you say the name. I've always said Shadrach. Now we're going to get into the New Testament and look at a couple of things that are not names, but they are words that are in the self-pronunciation here. And the first one is Herod. He is a ruler, and he's actually a sub-ruler, and they call him what I have always called a tetrarch. I think we have related words today, like we talk about Tetris, the idea of four. So I don't know how you say this word, and I looked it up in the dictionary, and I will say this pronunciation is at least an alternate pronunciation, but instead of Herod the Tetrarch, it says Herod the Tetrarch. So that is very interesting, and this might be one of those things where it depends on where you live, how you pronounce a word like this. I am talking about American pronunciations, so maybe my video applies most to how Americans pronounce these words. I would be curious, are there people in other places in the world who don't say Tetrarch, they say Tetrarch? But that is not something I have ever heard. That's not a big deal to me, just something I noticed here. Again, not really in keeping with the normal pronunciations that I've heard, but that's what the self-pronouncing text says. Now, what about this final word that I'm going to show you? This is actually a place that we have today in certain places. And yeah, people do pronounce this different ways, but I have never heard the pronunciation that I'm reading here. And it says, and landing at Syracuse. Syracuse. We tarried there 3 days. Now, again, I wouldn't actually mind if these pronunciations didn't match the way I say things, if they were more like the original language. But I really doubt that in the Greek it sounds more like Syracuse. So I just wonder, where do these pronunciations come from? And even if they were correct in some way, why don't we say them that way today? And if we don't say them that way today, why do we have these pronunciations in the self-pronouncing text? Now, to be honest with you, in saying all this, I'm not against self-pronouncing text. I just think it's a funny phrase to call these symbols that we put on words that in reality are not self-pronouncing. You actually have to figure out, what do these symbols mean? And even if you do figure it out, the pronunciation that they give may not match the pronunciation that most people actually use. So in that sense, it's kind of a scam. I mean, why do we call it self-pronouncing text? Again, this is really just supposed to be a little bit in jest and a lighthearted thing, but it is a curious thing to me and kind of an interesting thing to look at. And I really would like to hear what other people think about this in the comments below. It's possible that there are a lot of people out there who really love self-pronouncing text. I don't really understand why, because to me, I'm not sure how useful it is. If you're the kind of person who actually looks at all of those symbols, you're probably the kind of person who intuitively can kind of figure out how to pronounce those words anyway, I would guess. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But I can imagine there are some people out there who really like self-pronouncing text. At the end of the day, though, I'm not sure I would call it self-pronouncing text. But that is what it's called a lot of times, and I think it's kind of a funny name. So I just wanted to do this little video to share some of those things with you. I thought it was interesting and kind of fun. I'd love to hear what you think about all of this, though, in the comments section. And if you like Christian nerdy analysis, reviews, and fun like this, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification. But thank you so much for taking some time to listen to some of my maybe odd, unusual thoughts on this subject from a fresh perspective.